Well, as I want to say as fortune would have it, but no, as God would have it today, I have met this fine man who is visiting America from Jerusalem. Tell us your name.
David Abitball.
This is David, and the way we met was that I was his Uber driver. I picked him up in downtown Topeka, and he noticed my rainbow flag on my car, so he struck up a conversation and was about halfway through a sentence telling me of some connection. What did you say to me?
I think I mentioned the Westboro Baptist Church and the founder of the daughter, and then right away, I think you got it.
Yeah, right away I knew that this was the Jewish man who had had some conversations with Megan Phelps-Roper, granddaughter of the founder of the Westboro Baptist Church, Fred Phelps. And I had listened to her TED Talk, or was it a TED Talk? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been viewed I think 8 million times.
Wow, and I listened to it twice, so some of us doubled up on that. But David, I'm interested in the conversation that you had with Megan and how that all started.
So it was the early days of Twitter, and one of the major Jewish newspapers did an article about the most influential Jews on Twitter.
Oh.
And by some happenstance, they listed me as the second most influential Jew on Twitter, which is patently ridiculous. But that's how it turned out. And at the same time, Megan, who's obviously younger than most of her elders, decided that they would expand their scope of activity to include social media. That they wouldn't just pick at people live, but they would hit people up on social media and emerging technologies like Twitter. So she did some research and she found this article about the most influential Jews on Twitter. And she decided to start with them, meaning me. And she sent everyone on the list, I think there were 20 people on the list, she sent everyone on the list tweets telling them that they needed to repent and all that sort of thing. And I remember it was close to Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, and I wished my followers an easy fast, because it's a fast day, and she sent me a tweet that said, shouldn't you be telling them to really repent and atone for their sins? And I knew who she was because I'd been following the Westboro Baptist Church and GodHatesFags.com since the very beginning, since they registered the domain practically. And I thought, okay, I'm going to respond because I kind of have a responsibility to respond. So she was sending me all sorts of New Testament quotes, and I was telling her, don't waste your time on the New Testament. I don't believe in the New Testament. That's never going to convince me. Then she started sending me Old Testament quotes, and I told her that her translation was off, and she would know that if she spoke Hebrew. So she decided that she was going to learn Hebrew. Also, she decided that she was going to learn Hebrew because the family's plan was always to move to Israel to convert 144,000 Jews to Christianity to bring on the end days and the rapture and whatnot. So she was like, okay, I'll kill two birds with one stone, because if she's going to be in Israel, she was like, it'd be handy to speak Hebrew to buy groceries. This is literally what she's telling me. So I was like, okay, I'll help you with your Hebrew. So I'm helping her with the Hebrew, and we're joking around, and in between those sorts of innocuous exchanges, there was also the you should repent, you're going to hell. Constantly. So a few months after that, we do a Jewish festival in Long Beach, California for 3 days every year, where we have Jewish students, young adults and whatnot congregate for 3 days of food, music, all sorts of Jewy things and whatnot. And it's called Jewlicious, the Jewlicious Festival. So she sends me a tweet. She's like, David, guess what? I'm like, what? We're going to picket your festival. So they came down to Long Beach, California for 3 days. They picketed us for the entire duration of the festival. And I finally got to meet her in person. And it was a zoo. Nowadays, Westboro Baptist Church pickets are quiet affairs. They're mostly ignored. I was at one yesterday. No one paid them any attention. But then it was a complete zoo. There were people in costumes. There were people holding signs, counter-protesters, police everywhere. And in the middle of all this mayhem, I show up. I'm like, "Hi, Megan. Pleased to meet you." She's like, "Oh, Dave, it's so nice to meet you." And she's holding a sign. It says, "Jews killed Jesus. Your rabbi is a whore." And we're having this like friendly conversation in the middle of all this sort of thing. And we met one more time. I went to a Jewish conference in New Orleans, and her family were there. This time I brought them treats from Jerusalem. There's this thing called halva, which is like a sesame seed candy. I brought her halva from Jerusalem, and she brought me her favorite chocolate bar. And it was kosher. I showed them. I'm like, "Look, your favorite chocolate bar is blessed by a rabbi who's a whore." So we met in New Orleans, and we continued to discuss further. And then suddenly she stopped all contact with me for about 2 years. I didn't hear from her for 2 years. And I was like, okay, good riddance, you know. And 2 years later, she sends me an email. She's like, "David, I wanted you to know that the last point that you made in our ongoing theological debate hit home. And I didn't have a response to it. And I've been struggling with that for the last 2 years until I couldn't anymore. I couldn't stay and hold the signs and picket and be a part of this church and still feel good with myself, you know, intellectually, theologically, in every way. So I left the church because of that." And I was like floored. I was completely floored. So I asked her where she was, and she left with her sister Grace. So two people left the church, and they were in South Dakota. And I was like, what are you doing in South Dakota? She's like, "Well, mostly we're just crying. We're just crying, and we don't know what to do with our lives or anything." So I was like, "Well, we're having our festival again this year. And that's just in like a couple weeks. Why don't we fly you down to the festival? And now you can come as our guests, and you can get to know some of the people that you hurt and maligned, and, you know, meet people." So she came down. Grace flew, Megan drove. They came down and they stayed with us. And one of the people that, the person that hosted them was our executive director, who is the rabbi. So your rabbi is a whore, now your rabbi is a host. It's a joke I do all the time. It works great. And they stayed with us. They stayed in the rabbi's house. And they went to the festival. And people kind of didn't want to like them. They're like, "Oh, so now they realize they're wrong, and now we should like just forgive them." But they spoke about their experience and how they came about, how their decision came about to leave the church. And people were, you know, crying. They were touched and moved. Even the most cynical people in our group were just... My wife was there, that you just met on the phone. She wasn't my wife then. And she was like, I don't care. I don't want to talk to them. I'm glad that they're out of the church. And then when she flew in, we picked her up. Me and Megan and Grace picked her up from the airport, and she wasn't pleased with that. She married me anyway, so thank God. But yeah, so they went, they spoke at our festival. They ended up coming to the festival again the year afterward, and we've spoken a few times together. She's spoken a lot all over the country to like the FBI, to police groups, to veterans groups, to Jewish groups, the Anti-Defamation League. And we've spoken a couple times together, which is always fun. She visited me and my family in Israel last year, so we spent a week mad touring up and down the country, seeing the Western Wall and the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dead Sea, and you know, all that fun Christian stuff, all that fun Judeo-Christian stuff. And yeah, and now they did an article about this in New York Magazine, and it's been picked up. So she's got a book coming out about her experience soon. I think before the end of the year, it's gonna be published. And Reese Witherspoon optioned the book to turn into a feature film. So they've got, you know, great writers. The director of Spider-Man 2 is going to direct the film. So this is a serious thing. I don't know how that works thematically, action film, Westboro Baptist Church. But, and then people ask me, like, who's going to play you?
Yeah. Well,
And
you ought to play
I
you.
said I insist on Vin Diesel. And there has to be a car chase scene worked in there somehow. So
Well,
and now
David-
I'm here.
Well, and here is, we're standing in front of the Equality House here in Topeka, Kansas, and the Transgender House, which is next door, both of which are right across the street from famed Westboro Baptist Church, and you see GodHatesFags.com right on the front. And so David came here, put a drone up in the air, took some aerial pictures, and
Fearful that they're going to come running out of the church and call the cops on me or something.
well, nobody's showing their face.
We're all good.
And they knew that he was going to show up here sometime today, so...
Right. I went to a picket yesterday in Kansas City. They picketed Drake, who's a famous rapper, who also happens to be Canadian and Jewish and black.
Wow.
So they picketed his show last night in Kansas City, and I saw them there, and I told them I was coming to Topeka, and if they would invite me for a cup of coffee. They said that I'm a possessed demon, and that no, they would not be inviting me in for a cup of coffee.
I know you're crushed. Well, here's the thing that I'm curious about. What was the last thing you said to her that sent her on a 2-year contemplation?
So one of the signs that they hold up says death penalty for fags. And I said there's a number of problems with that sign. It just says that if you're gay, you should be killed. There's no possibility for redemption. There's no possibility for, not sinning. That's it. You're gay, you die. And that doesn't make any sense. Because there are people in your church who've committed capital offenses according to the Bible, and they're still members in good standing. And I said, there's this woman in your church who had a child out of wedlock. That's adultery and fornication. That's classic death penalty. And I didn't want to rub it in. That's Shirley. Her mom had a child out of wedlock. So I was like, and she had an opportunity to repent. And so you're not giving the opportunity. You're picking and choosing who gets to repent. A. B. I mentioned the story in the New Testament. Okay. I always have to do that. Sorry. We believe God doesn't change his mind, but whatever. Of Jesus and the adulterous woman, and they said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Everybody put down their stones, and he told the woman, "Go forth and sin no more." Now, she committed a capital offense. She should have been killed, but she wasn't, because Jesus forgave her, and presumably she repented and was not going to be adulterous anymore. And that was interesting. And she was talking to me about how she struggled with that, and she was saying that, like, well, we're not killing people. We're not saying we're going to kill them. We're saying the government's going to kill them. The government should kill them. That all tragedies that befall the American people befall them because they don't have a death penalty against homosexuals. But then she was like, no, but really we're killing them. We're saying that they should be killed, and there is a direct line of causality and whatnot. So at first she thought, well, maybe she wouldn't hold that particular sign. And then that would be okay. She asked her elders to how to respond to me. And they were like, don't bother, it's nonsense and whatnot. And then eventually she just couldn't do it, and she left. And it was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back, because there were other issues in the church with women's voices being pushed aside. Her mom, Shirley, was like a big voice in the Westboro Baptist Church, and then she was kind of like shunted aside in favor of the elders, who are all men. But that's what did it. That's what started the whole process. And I was like, that's great. I'm glad I went to a religious high school
Well, the thing that I appreciate, David, about your demeanor and attitude about it is you don't appear to be the guy that yelled back.
I never yelled.
Yeah.
No.
But I'm not even physically yelling.
Right.
But you know what I mean.
No, I was as a Jew who's well versed in Jewish history. I mean, I could just point back to the Holocaust, and the Holocaust didn't just happen. There was a whole process involved, and the first step was to dehumanize the Jews. So they had their propaganda organs, putting out offensive, horrible cartoons in the newspapers and movies likening Jews to vermin. There'd be like Jews in a crowded marketplace, a bunch of rats, And then once you dehumanize people and you liken them to vermin, it's not such a big step beyond that to killing them. If you see a cockroach in your house, you don't think twice, you step on it. I mean, I don't know. Most people do. Maybe you're more humanitarian than I am, but I step on that cockroach and I don't think twice about it. And when you when you take out that aspect, it makes it super hard. It makes it super easy to kill them. But if you humanize people, then it's so much harder to hate them. And my conversation with Megan wasn't just theology, it was also what I did that day. Oh, I played Frisbee in the park, all these sorts of things that had nothing to do with Westboro Baptist Church and whatnot. Friendly conversation, and I was always polite, and I was always respectful, and I was always civil, and sometimes funny. And that, I felt that would make it that much harder to hate me and my kind. And the whole package worked, respectful conversation, making yourself relatable, and being polite and meeting them on their level. I mean, it's kind of ironic that what did it was a story from the New Testament, something that I don't believe in at all, right?
But she did. And that
she
was
did,
her
exactly.
frame of
And I was so I told her right from the beginning, your theology is internally contradictory. That means based on your own standards, you're wrong. You and your family and this obscene church are wrong, and that worked. I mean, and to her credit, she was so convinced of the righteousness of her way. They had an answer for everything. They drilled them with like Bible quotes. She knew her Bible. It was not easy debating her, let me tell you, because I had to go look up the verse, look up the commentary, that she didn't mind. She was like, sure, go ahead, say whatever you want to say. You're never going to change my mind, but I'll listen to what you're saying. And she dealt with me also in a respectful manner, because she was using the same techniques that I was using to try to make me turn,
Yeah.
But the right argument won the day.
I love it. I totally love, like you said, the attitude with which you came forward. You and I had this conversation in the car earlier, that it's hard to hate somebody you love.
I mean, you don't even have to love them.
Love isn't always a romantic love. Love can just be caring a whole lot for
if
a
you
human
just
being.
see a part of yourself in them.
Yeah. And there is a part of ourselves.
Of course, we're all made. In Hebrew they call it B'Tselem Elokim. In the, how do you say that in English? We're made in the. We look like God. We're like
in the image of God.
In the image of God. That's it. Tselem Elokim. We're all made in the image of God, and we all share that together. We all have that humanity that we share. And once that comes out, it's so much harder to, like when you're out in a war and you're killing someone. If they're an enemy soldier, it's easy to kill them. But if you can see them as a son or a father, with loved ones just like you. It's much, much harder.
Much harder.
Much
the
harder.
other thing that's interesting about this whole story is that you're not a gay man. It wasn't an engaging conversation between a gay man.
It was. I'm a Jewish man, though.
Yes.
That's why they came after me, because I'm Jewish. And I mean, I've marched in gay pride parades. I helped found one of Jerusalem's leading lesbian groups, you're talking about like how hard it is for adult lesbians to meet each other. Me and my friend Sarah, it was her idea, but I helped a lot, and she kindly puts me down as a co-founder, which is very kind of her. But it's a group where lesbian women meet in different, like, regular bars, pubs in the city, not gay bars or whatnot, and they have like a chilled out, you know, sort of like evening with just socializing. Sometimes there's like a little music or whatever, and it's something that she felt she needed, because in Jerusalem, if you wanted to meet lesbian people, the easiest thing to do is to go to Tel Aviv, where they have a very active group. But in Tel Aviv, it's like disco party, you know, blah 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 and all that sort of thing. And it's like a meat market, and everyone's young and whatnot. And this was more for the adult crowd, and it brought in the full cross section of Jerusalem's LGBTQ community. And I was like happy to be a small part of it, you know.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. That's great, David. Well,
it's called the Women's Gathering. You can find them on Facebook if you're ever in Jerusalem. And
what's it called?
The Women's Gathering.
The Women's Gathering. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, David and I are going to stay in touch, and over time, I'm sure he's going to have some feedback into the website that's yet to come. Although by the time people see this, it will be in reality. But thank you, David, so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
Okay.